3rd, 2021. It's 10 a.m. The meeting is being recorded. So everyone please remember that. And we'll begin with the roll call.
Good morning, everyone. Carl England,
Here.
Jack Prothrow,
Here.
Jeff Greenfield,
Here.
Bruce Nelson,
Here.
Diane Fladmo,
Here.
Mark Berry,
Here.
Jeff Meredith,
Here.
and Terry Cohey is absent, and Maggie Peterson is absent.
Okay, we have a quorum. We do indeed. And then are there any public comments on issues within the board's jurisdiction that don't have to do with our administrative rule hearing? We'll take public comment on that when we come to it. Anyone? All right, we have none. So now we're going to move to our administrative rule hearing, which I think we've discussed among ourselves as something that is often delegated to a hearings officer, but our rules don't provide for that. They may after today, but so we have to run through the formalities of doing this. Dan White is our staff person on this. So I think with that, Dan, I can open it and start with the script. Is that correct?
Yes,
Okay,
Mr. Chairman. Perfect.
So I apologize to the rest of the board members, but Dan, there is a lengthy thing that we have to do in order to make this comply with all the rules. So here we go. It's 10:02 a.m. It's Tuesday, March 23rd, 2021, and this is the time set for the public hearing on the proposed amendment to Administrative Rules of Montana, Section 8.97.715, 8.97.716, and 8.97.718, and the repeal of Administrative Rules of Montana Rules 8.97.717, 8.97.719, 8.97.1101, 8.97.1502, 8.97.1601, 8.97.1701, 8.97.1702, 8.97.1706, 8.97.1708, 8.97.1709, 8.17.1801, 8.97.1802, 8.97.1803, 8.97.1804, 8.97.1805, 8.97.1901, 8.97.1902, and 8.97.1903, and the transfer of Administrative Rules 8.97.1201, 8.97.1704, and 8.97.1705, and the amendment and transfer of ARM 8.97.1202 and 8.97.1703 related to the Board of Investments rules generally. At this time, for anyone that's here to testify, we need to take care of a couple of housekeeping matters because we are appearing remotely. Since we do not have the ability to have anyone who wants to testify sign in on an official hearing attendee register, I will use the hearing recording participant queue and identification of the commenting parties to assemble such a register for the board's official rule file. Anyone who will testify must provide their name and their in their attendee window so that we have an accurate attendance and spelling of names for the hearing record. And I ask that anyone appearing via computer, please turn on their video if you have that capability so we can see those who are appearing. This enhances our interaction for this hearing. As I said, my name is Carl England. I've been designated by the board to preside over this hearing. Appearing to represent the board staff is Dan White, Chief Legal Counsel of the Board of Investments, who will be presenting and explaining the board's proposed rulemaking. If everyone's ready, I formally open this administrative rules hearing and dispense with some of the required business. The Montana Administrative Procedures Act at Section 2-4-302 sub 7 of the Montana Code and Administrative Rules of Montana Section 1.3.311 require me to read the Notice of Function of the Administrative Rule Review Committee. So that's what I'm going to do. The Administrative Rule Review is a function of interim committees and the Environmental Quality Council, the EQC. These interim committees and the EQC have administrative rule review, program evaluation, and monitoring functions for the executive branch agencies and the entities attached to agencies for administrative purposes. The Economic Affairs Interim Committee has oversight regarding rule changes proposed by the Department of Commerce and the Montana Board of Investments. The interim committees and the EQC have the authority to make recommendations to an agency regarding the adoption, amendment, or repeal of a rule, or to request that the agency prepare a statement of the estimated economic impact of a proposal. They may poll the members of the legislature to determine if a proposed rule is consistent with the intent of the legislature, or during the legislative session, introduce a bill repealing a rule or directing an agency to adopt or amend a rule, or a joint resolution recommending that an agency adopt, amend, or repeal a rule. The interim committee and the EQC welcome comments and invite members of the public to appear before them or to send written statements in order to bring to their attention any difficulties with the existing or proposed rules. The mailing address for them is P.O. Box 201706, Helena, Montana, 59620-1706. So that's the required notice that we were required to read. We've done so. The Board of Investments maintains a list of interested persons who wish to receive notices of the board's rulemaking actions. If you would like to be added to the list, you can email Dan White in care of the board, and Dan White's email address is dwhyte@mt.gov. The board published the notice of public hearing on this proposed rulemaking in MAR notice number 8-97-100 in the 2021 Montana Administrative Register, issue number 4, dated February 26, 2021 at page 205, and notified all interested parties of record. At this hearing and through the end of the comment period, any interested person may submit data, views, or arguments for additional rule changes orally or in writing. For written comments, those may be mailed to Dan White, care of the Board of Investments, P.O. Box 200126, Helena, Montana, 59604-0216, or emailed to Dan at dwhyte, that's DWHYTE@mt.gov. The comment period for this proposed rulemaking expires at 5 p.m. on April 2nd, 2021. This hearing is being recorded in accordance with Montana's public meeting laws. the Zoom meeting system should have notified you, but notice of my recording of this meeting is also required to be made orally. For those providing comment, please speak clearly and identify yourself and who it is that you represent. If that's applicable, please confine your statements to the proposed rulemaking. If reading from a prepared statement, the board would appreciate a copy of that statement for the official record if you can send one. The purpose of this hearing is to receive public comment on the proposed rulemaking only. There is no exchange of substantive dialogue between the commenters and the board. The board and Mr. White are in attendance today to listen to your comments or feedback. The board will take all oral and written comments, including recommendations for additional rule changes, into consideration prior to finalizing this proposed rulemaking and will formally respond to them in the final adoption notice as provided for in section 2-4-305 of the Montana Code. Now, after Mr. White opens with an overview of the proposed rulemaking, I will then invite oral comments. While not required, commenters may designate themselves as proponent or opponent or something similar to the rulemaking, which does help the board gauge the level of support or opposition to this rulemaking. So Dan, you may begin your part and describe the board's proposals.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I can find it on my many screens that I have open, I will include the rule just so it's in front of everyone. So you should have in front of you the proposed administrative rules that's in the Montana Administrative Register at this point. My name is Dan White. I am Chief Legal Counsel for the Board of Investments and here to testify on behalf of the board with respect to these rules that are being proposed. Section 2-4-110 requires each agency to assign a person to review any rule notice and the substance of any proposed rule change. That's my duty here today. Additionally, the code requires an agency to conduct a periodic review of its rules, which hasn't been done for several years for the board's rules. So this process began as a comprehensive review by the Board of Investment staff some months ago. The staff was able to get to a certain point with that review, but needed help with staff counsel to get it over the finish line. So when I began with the board at the first of the year, I jumped into this rules process, discussed it with the staff who are familiar and experts in the areas that we were discussing, and put together a proposed change. I also worked with the Secretary of State's office to get it in the right kind of context and formatting. And what you see before you is the official word. What we, the staff, recommend to, along with the executive director, recommend to the board is 3 items. One is to require amendment of 3 rules. Another is for 18 rules to be repealed and for 5 rules to be transferred to a new subpart. And let me explain. The amendments that we're talking about are fairly simple. Generally speaking, we're amending so that the rules accurately show which programs are in place. One example I'll give to you is what's on your screen, and that's what's known as the InterCap Easy program. That program is no longer in place for the board, so it would be inaccurate to keep it in there. You can see where it's been stricken, and then also some additional changes to, for instance, to say that the loan program is an InterCap revolving loan program, making it more accurate to what's being done now. You'll see, because most of you may not be familiar with how the rules work, you'll see what's called the reasonable necessity. That's a requirement of any agency who proposes to change its rules in any fashion to describe to the public what it is that they are doing and why. And so the reasonable necessity does just what I said it does. It gets rid of the intercap easy. It changes loan program to revolving loan program and makes those things more accurate. So that's essentially what we're doing with the 3 rule amendments. Nothing too substantive, no major changes in program. Next, you'll see several, as Chair England read them out, you'll see several rules that are being repealed. Those are being repealed essentially because they either repeat statutory language, which according to the Montana Code Annotated is improper. So we're getting rid of those. There are programs that are no longer in place or that we're proposing to repeal the rules that were related to those programs, and to repeal some other items that the executive director and I think are better served if it's in procedures or policies of the board. So there are several items that will be in the Board of Investments governance manual that would also have been in rule at one point, but rules are not required for those particular policies. And we're recommending that the board can be more adaptive and able to make changes as necessary, whether it's legal or political or market driven, that it can do that in board meetings and as part of its governance manuals, rather than to have to go through a 6-month rule process. And so there is a repeal of some particular provisions for that reason. And finally, with respect to the transfer of the rules, there are several sections that are, for instance, on your screen, the confidentiality of information. This happened to be in a loan program subpart, and so could be read to mean that the confidentiality of information with respect to the board was only applicable to that particular subpart. It was my recommendation to the executive director and his agreement that confidentiality of information provision should be an overarching provision that the board reviews and the staff applies. And so I've proposed changing it to 8.97.313, which is a general subpart that will house just the more global statements that apply to the board generally. We also made clear in that particular provision that it had been written previously to say this kind of information is confidential. What we wanted to make clear is that in the state of Montana, and you'll hear from me in a little bit with respect to confidentiality provisions, that most things that are housed with any state agency are public information, and there are exceptions for privacy considerations or for confidentiality. And so we rewrote that provision to make it clear that the public's right to information comes first, and then confidentiality applies under certain circumstances. So, Mr. Chairman, those are the reasons why we, the staff, recommend to the board these proposed rule changes. As you indicated, the comment period is open until April 2nd. So we'll, if there are, whether there is or is not further testimony today, we'll take comment so that the board knows what we do from there. If there are comments, we reply to those comments from the public or from interested parties. If we agree that recommended changes from them should be made, we will make those changes and tell the board about that. So additional repeals, additional changes to language. If we don't agree, we explain why it is that we do that. And then the next 2 dates for adoption are April 6th, which I anticipate may happen if there are no comments, or April 20th if there are comments to which we must reply. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm available for questions.
Thank you, Dan. So we can open the hearing now for testimony, if there is any. Everyone who is attending here today is in what's called the participant queue, and if you are here to comment, you need to be recognized for the record before you present comments or testimony. For those who are connected via computer, the video conference window has a toolbar at the bottom, and you should see a participants button. When you click on that button, the name of everyone in the meeting will appear. At the bottom of that sidebar will be some nonverbal meeting interaction choices, and among those, usually on the left, will be a raise your hand. If you desire to comment on the rulemaking, please raise your hand so that we can see that, and we'll take any comments in the order in which they come. If I miss seeing your notification, feel free to get my attention by raising or waving your hand on the screen itself. And if we have anybody attending through a telephone call, we'll move through those calls in the queue in order that I see them, and mute your connection to provide you an opportunity to state your comment. So, start generally with proponents. Are there any proponents who wish to speak? If so, click the raise your hand notification. And Lindsay, are you helping me see this?
Yep, I do not see any hands raised.
Okay. What about anybody on a call? The only person I have on a call is Jack, board member.
That's correct.
Are there any opponents? If so, click the raise your hand. Dan, don't click raise your hand. Anybody else, anybody present that wishes to be heard? If so, click the raise your hand. Lindsay?
I do not see any hands raised.
Well, just as predicted, I think. Is there any other business that requires attention while we are, for this matter, while we're still connected? Lindsay, anybody saying anything?
Nope, I do not see anything.
Okay. Seeing none, on behalf of the Board of Investments, thank you for attending today's administrative rules hearing, and we'll close the public hearing.
So,
All right.
Mr. Chairman, very quickly, quick poll of the board. Is the board interested in us bringing a governance policy revision forward in April to at least partially delegate this administrative rule process to staff, now that we've gone through it a bit?
Mark, you're muted.
Yeah, I would be interested in seeing that delegation.
Okay. Others, thoughts?
I would be interested in hearing from our council on staff and also our executive director as to the pros and cons of delegating or not.
I will have it in my tab 2 memo, at least thoughts for the April meeting.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay.
With you, Diane, I agree. We should hear about all of this and then we can make that decision.
Okay. Well, it's not
Just-
like we'd go through this a lot. This is the first time in my years with the board that we've ever had to go through this, so. And I thought I did a spectacular job.
Fantastic. I've never heard anybody read the script quite that way.
Where is that applause reaction?
Where's the applause button?
There it is, right there.
All right. Unless anyone else wants to tell me what a fantastic job I did, we can move on to the agenda item and the decision-making on the request for proposals for custodial bank. Dan, are you in charge of this?
Peg and I will tag team it. First of all, you have my memo dated March 3rd regarding The timelines regarding issuance, we're hoping that it goes live today if the board approves the RFP, which is why you didn't see an issuance date. It would be today. First, I want to recognize Lindsay Longwell. There she is with RVK. She and her team have been phenomenal, awesome, tremendous, and overly helpful to get us to this, I think, better product than what we dealt with 7 years ago. The items you see on the memo that we paid particular attention to are first, optional inclusion of the DC plan as an asset under management. We're asking that the whoever the custodian is, or the custodian bidders, I gotta get the terminology right, be prepared to take those assets on under management of the board. They are currently outsourced by Impera. This has been a point of conversation with the board for many years. Figured now is the time to at least begin building the infrastructure around it so our options are available and wide. Flexibility for securities lending. Currently, we have an exclusive contract with State Street. This is a binary decision. It's either all with State Street or all not with State Street. We can't blend it because that way you wouldn't know what assets are being lent by who. So it is a on or off decision, and we're asking for pricing on both sides.
And why?
Why are this is currently a revenue stream we get. We do a report on this to the board where we lend our securities to third parties, and then we're able to share in the gains from that lending.
No, I understand why we do securities lending, but why would we not have the custodial bank be in charge of this?
Potential for better earning opportunities outside of the custodial bank.
Okay. That's just my experience has always been that the custodial bank did all this for us. I was just curious.
It's how it's always been done. We're just asking for pricing on what it would look like if they didn't do it. We'll be able to look at multiple vendors at that point. It just gives us options. If we pigeonhole ourselves at the beginning of the RFP process, we don't have the opportunity to enlarge our opportunity set. So we may very well land there, but for the time being, we want to have maximum flexibility within the request for proposals. And this will.
Yeah, Bruce.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thanks, Dan. Does this create any kind of advantage or disadvantage to anyone who might bid?
So we took great care to make sure that it is a neutral playing field, that it doesn't create an advantage for an incumbent or any particular bidder. I mean, to be quite honest, there's fewer than a John Tester handfuls of bidders in the universe for this space. 5, 6, 7 worldwide. So we're not talking about a wide opportunity set. So we really took efforts to make sure that we had the opportunity to get the best bids, despite any incumbency or other preferences that could be built in.
Where did this idea come from? Did we have this idea? Did it come from our RVK? Is it from collective experience?
Lindsay, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe this was in the last RFP as well.
Yes, it was. The optionality of with and without pricing was in the last couple RFPs that have been issued. And we find it to just be best practice so that you can really get, a good idea, like Dan was saying, for flexibility purposes and for growth opportunities, of, these are the fees that would be incurred should we move forward with custodial securities lending. And then if for some reason the board decided to either eliminate securities lending as a program or move to a third party, you would still have, a good idea of what would happen with your custodial relationship.
So if I could, Mr. Chairman, mechanically, then how would this work if we ultimately selected a bidder that did not provide the service? Would we have to do then a separate RFP for that particular service?
So, Mr. Chairman and Director Nelson, we're not asking that someone not bid. We're asking that they submit pricing to both do the work of securities lending and to submit a bid where they would not do the work of securities lending.
Okay.
So it's not a, you can take the option to not bid on this. It's how much will it cost us for the contract for you to do it?
Okay.
How much will it cost us for you to not?
Okay, thank you, Dan and Lindsay.
We are wishing to strengthen our service level agreements with the whoever the custodial bank is. We want to have additional contractual obligations between the board and whoever the successful bidder is. We are also working to enhance our make-whole accountability, where if there is an error or omission on the part of the custodian, the board is not out the revenue or the income. If the error or omission is on the part of the custodial bank, we are able to recoup those losses. We did ask for, or we did provide some additional clarity around the book of record and data management aspects of the relationship. And finally, we are looking at implementing direct ledger, general ledger feeds. This would minimize BOI manual interventions between the custodian and the state accounting system, hopefully alleviating some of the pressure on our accounting staff. So those are from Tectonic, the major thrust that the staff has worked into the RFP. We've also broken out the
Dan,
evaluation.
can I ask a question about that last one?
Yep,
Is that an option?
we're asking for pricing around it. We're not saying that it's a mandatory service.
Okay. And I guess this is neither here nor there for now, so if it's too detailed an answer, just tell me, we can discuss it later. Is that something we want?
Mr. Chairman, yes, very much so.
Is it?
It would, right now, we get data from the custodial bank. We then have to manually input it into Sabres and reconcile. This would allow a direct feed from the custodian to Sabres, and we would eliminate multiple processes by BOI in the interim.
And is that something, maybe this goes to Lindsay, is that something that custodial banks want to do or like to do or have to do, or how?
We have, a lot of experience with various providers of developing direct ledger feeds, whether it's, with a bot system, a purchase system, a lease system, or whether in this case it's an internal system. And developing those feeds, I think we find benefits across the board, both on the custodial side, where reconciliations and processes associated with reconciliations are streamlined, automated, and easier for both the client and for the custodian. So we find that the custodians are willing to, work to develop such feeds to improve processes across the board. But each project is individualized. So, we would want to make sure we understood what process the vendors would take, what resources they have available to develop the feeds, some other areas of detail on what their plan would be to approach such a project, including the associated costs as well.
But a glitch in that comes back to us, doesn't it, Dan? And in audit?
A glitch in that or a glitch in our manual interventions all come back to us, yes.
Right, right.
Jack came off mute there for a second. I don't know if he had a question.
What's that?
Jack came off mute.
Just my question was, it's not really a question, it's a statement, but I want to make sure that that service, that we can hold them to account for things is as strong as we can make it, because that, in my mind, that has been the problem with the last contract. And so it looks to me like it is improved greatly, and I want to compliment you on that.
Thank you.
Okay, Dan, I interrupted you. I apologize.
Oh, me?
Yeah, I said I interrupted you.
Oh, okay. Well, I just, relative to scoring, we did break it out rather than having one team basically out of commission for several months. We broke it up based on subject matter expertise. So for questionnaire A, organizational resources, technology, and staffing, the CIO, a representative of accounting, operations, and RVK will be scoring. Also, just a note, Peggy McEwen, our deputy director, state government expert all around, will be facilitator for this entire process with all teams. Questionnaire B, security, safekeeping, and core services, CIO, comptroller, operations, and RVK. Questionnaire C, security settlement, fixed income, public markets, operations, accounting, and RVK. Questionnaire D, DC plans, custody, accounting, and daily NAV processing, fixed income, public markets, accounting, and RVK. Questionnaire E, cash management, operations, fixed income, and RVK. Questionnaire F, foreign exchange, public markets, operations, RVK. Questionnaire G, securities lending, CIO, fixed income, RVK. Questionnaire H, comprehensive accounting system, including transfer agency, accounting, and RVK. Questionnaire I, performance management and portfolio risk analysis, public, private investments, operations, risk management, and RVK. Questionnaire J, LP services and investment performance book of record, CIO, accounting, comptroller, and operations, and RVK. Questionnaire K, transition and conversion, public market, fixed income, accounting, comptroller, operations, and RVK. Financial stability, accounting, operations, Department of Administration, and Peggy again, privacy requirements, Department of Commerce, IT, our IT, state ITSD, and Peggy, service organizations, internal control assessment and internal controls, comptroller, accounting, risk management, and RVK. Oral presentation, product demonstration and interview, operations, CIO, public markets, accounting, fixed income, private investments, executive director, and RVK. Cost proposal, Peggy and I will be scoring individually, as well as RVK and the D of A procurement officer. Equal pay for Montana Women's Certificate, D of A will do the certification on that, and the mandatory requirements affirmation, risk management will cover. So as you can see, a lot of different sections to the RFP. We've split it up not only amongst teams, but amongst individuals within those teams, so we can have a little bit better flow. Individual questions received from board members. I'll take some of them at a tectonic level. There were some aspects where we didn't specifically call out who will be doing what, but rather we'll have the opportunity in the review process to see between sections whether or not they were responsive in a way we wanted. So if you had concerns about why didn't you delineate this person, that person, in many instances, it's sort of a test without a test. We wanted to see what that individual or what those responses were doing between sections for consistency. Let me see. Transitioning, we got a question on transitioning. It doesn't much matter the time period, it's the assets. So if they've done those transitions with 25 billion or more, it should be fairly common for 80 respondents to have been in that environment. The demonstrations are optional. If there is a big score, we did increase the score value. So instead of being 100 points, it's now 1,000 points. So we'll be able to delineate between bidders more easily. If there's a, I'm not going to call it a blowout, but if there's a big spread between the respondents, we may not even choose to have a demonstration. The contract itself, what you see in the RFP, is not the final contract. It's just the must-haves from the Department of Administration. We will look at the service level agreements and the individual RFP responses to develop the contract. So the chart and who the staff is, it does say both annually but ongoing if there are changes in our immediate staffing levels within the RFP, and we'll be able to score off of that. SOC audits, we got a question about how frequently we should expect assurances from the respondents and bidders. SOC audits are typically annual or biannual. And we will be able to score against that based on how frequently they will provide that. The continuity plan, we don't get specifics in many instances due to confidentiality concerns by the individual bidders. However, within questionnaire A, question 32, describe the major components of the business continuity and disaster recovery plans. We're comfortable that that will cover it. We'll also continue to do our annual testing with the Department of Administration and our custodial bank and our depository bank on an annual basis to make sure that we continue operations. There were some terms of art within the RFP. If you have questions on those, happy to address them individually. One that came up multiple times was proper instructions. Proper instructions is a formal term of art where we delineate who can give instructions, who is an initiator, who is an approver. That is our determination, and we submitted, at least at this point, through our FTOP systems. So that is a term of art that's very specific and that we delineate. We have added some language around state fund fiscal year end, which I believe I'll read to you very quickly. On page 14, we renumbered B to C, and B now reads, offer must meet the fiscal year end deadlines for any pool or participant which are not expressly delineated at the direction of staff. So this not only covers state fund, but if there are other pools, for instance, the DC plan or some other asset under management, we can delineate what that fiscal year end looks like, and they must be responsive to it. Global Treasury Pricing Committee, question on whether or not that is implied. It is implied that they would have that. If they don't, they have to provide detailed exceptions as to why they don't within the scope of services. We did add the renumber two sections, section 2.8 and 2.9 are now 2.7 and 2.8 on page 19. Participant definition, it depends on where you are within the RFP, but for, in some instances, it'll be a trust fund participant, a CAP participant, or a STIP participant. There was one section where a participant came up that was specific to STIP participants who can initiate buys and sells. Trust fund, as always, is done on a monthly basis by the fixed income team. Parallel, we are requiring that there be a parallel system set up so that we have a month to verify that the new custodian matches with the old custodian and we get the same numbers, similar to what we did with the financial statement preparation. Should we go through a transition, there would be an overlap to verify that the numbers continue to mesh, not mess. I think that is all of them. Just a reminder, we are required to have state ITSD participate in the state chief investment officer. It came up, what's CIO mean in our context? And for the purposes of technology, it's the state chief information officer. We also have the chief investment officer, but that's delineated by section. So, Mr. Chair, other than those few comments, I think we've addressed the concerns of the board within the revised RFP, and staff recommends approval and issuance.
Questions? Bruce?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. You know, back to this kind of third party issue. I see one other place in Appendix A that State Street uses a third-party accounting system. Northeast Retirement Services. And in the questionnaire G, it does ask if they're proposing an internal solution or proposing a third-party solution. I guess two questions. First, has it been problematic in any way to have this done by a third party with State Street?
So, Mr. Chairman and Bruce, I've got to be a little nebulous about how I respond to that because we're about to issue an RFP, so I can't really get into specifics of what did or did not work because it may cloud the scoring on a future bid. But what I can tell you is that within the structure of the RFP, we will be able to review a bidder's response and gauge whether or not that internal work or third-party work has sufficient protections to ensure the board's continuity and reliability of the numbers.
Okay, so basically, because as near as I could tell, this was the only other place in the RFP where a third party was mentioned. You're confident that none of the potential bidders, again, same question as before, have an advantage or are at a disadvantage because of this?
Mr. Chairman and Director Nelson, no. We believe, and I'll let RVK chime in on this as well, that this sets about the most level playing field we could for all potential bidders to respond. Whatever creativity or third party or efficiencies they have to offer us, we'll be able to see and score and overlay with what Chief Investment Officer believes it fulfills our fiduciary duty to maximize earnings and minimize losses, but also on the other side that we can account for all of those dollars fairly and accurately in a timely and efficient way on my side of the ledger with the accounting staff and our performance teams. Lindsay, Jonathan, thoughts?
Yeah, I just would add that, we observe different approaches being taken by custodians, which is why we wanted to include, questions and specifics related to third-party relationships If a custodian is able to provide the services to the board, sufficiently through third-party relationships, we want to make sure that we can account for those and have the specific details on those relationships to be able to gauge what services they can provide and to make sure that they're providing, holistic requirements that are needed there.
And the only other detail I would add to that, Jonathan Kowalik from RVK, apologies to be.
Hi, Jonathan.
Would be from the standpoint of the fact that the organizational details that are solicited during the RFP process and the questionnaire itself will give the additional detail necessary to assess the service provision and use of affiliates, use of any third parties.
Okay. Jonathan, Lindsay, Dan, thank you.
Anything else?
I have one.
Mark.
If we approve this today, which I don't see why we wouldn't, and it goes out today, you're giving like 3 weeks for questions from the offers. That's a pretty long time. Is that correct? I mean, that's a long time. So my question is, so you're only giving yourself like a week to respond to those questions. Would you consider at all moving that April 14th date up so you give yourself a couple of weeks to respond to the question?
So the timeline, we're hopeful, but as we get questions, we will turn them around quickly. Lindsay and Jonathan and RVK are going to be helping us respond.
Okay.
So as we get questions, they'll take first crack. We'll then add on. From our perspective, giving that sufficient time for people to seek an understanding of what we want is ideal. So that, if they have any questions about anything that may not be, or maybe a little nebulous, or they just don't quite understand, we give them more than enough time. So when we get to contract refinement and we get to service level agreement, there can be no excuses on their part. You had 3 weeks to ask questions. Here were the expectations laid out. If you didn't address it early on, not our problem. So we think a little more time up front is advisable here.
Anything else?
Jeff has his hand up.
Yep,
He's
I have a
very
question.
polite, unlike the rest of us.
Oh, Jeff.
Yeah, there you go, right.
Yeah.
Good morning. So
morning.
the one question I have on the contract, which Dan, I know you mentioned was kind of in a first draft form, but the termination clause in that contract seems to be, I don't know, I guess, is there an opportunity for us to make that termination clause maybe more flexible for ourselves in the future, just to kind of be able to hold them accountable for maybe changes in technology or things that we may have, omitted from this contract? It just seems to be fairly locked in from my perspective.
So this contract that you see before you is just the state minimums. We can add to, we can't take from.
Okay.
So that's sort of the limitations we have. I can tell you, going through state procurement for a $25 billion RFP has been less than optimal. We've had a number of go-arounds with it, but if there are elements within here that, once we get into contract refinement, we see, hey, maybe we need a trap door for this specific provision, or, we start out with custodial or securities lending with this particular bidder and then decide, oh, we're going to go somewhere else. We'll address those within the contract refinement process. We just can't have anything that's not on here or anything that's on here excluded by state procurement law.
Yeah, perfect. That's what exactly I'm thinking about, is just like the trapdoor escapes, ways to kind of put some leverage on these custodians, just to meet your guys' needs in the future.
Yep.
Anything else, Jeff?
Nope.
So Lindsay and Jonathan, how difficult in your experience is a transition from one custodian to another?
I can start, and then Jonathan, you can add. I know you've had a lot more experience with transitions, but I would say, you know, a custodial transition comes with inherent risk and costs, whether it explicit or implicit costs. You know, certainly comes with time and attention. It's an important relationship, and in our opinion, I think, you know, should there be a custodial change, you would want to make sure that it's, you know, for all the right reasons, because of those associated risks. But that being said, it can be done. And I each one of these offers has, you know, detailed plans and experience with transitions, to make sure that, you know, the process is as smooth as possible. I think there's some things that can be done through the RFP process up front. One of those is contract negotiations, that can kind of help to streamline the transition itself, you know, and advanced planning in that sense of, you know, understanding the portfolio and knowing what would be involved with a transition. But, you know, it definitely does come with both explicit and implicit costs. Jonathan?
Yeah, I would share. I mean, that transitions are not something to be contemplated lightly, and I would say that to that end, I think that is reflected in the fact that there is a, you know, technical question set that is evaluated within the RFP that specifically addresses that.
And Jonathan, is that where the scoring takes into account the difficulties of a transition?
Well, it takes into account the mitigation, if you will, or, you know, potential mitigation by a non-incumbent provider to the, you know, the cost and risks that Lindsay was mentioning as it relates to moving assets. And there's several different components of it. It's moving of the assets, or re-registering, quite frankly, because the assets are not really held physically anymore, but re-registering those, setting up new valuation, or basically recreating your valuation and analytics processes, and effectively shifting business processes that are existing right now and doing that in a risk-controlled and well-documented and effective manner. And as we look at that, it is not something that, you know, should be taken lightly, but it's also not something that, you know, an asset owner, its fiduciary board, or the staff that work with it should be unnecessarily afraid of. You know, I think that it is a very complex and critical relationship, but one that can be moved for the right reasons if the evaluation, you know, and ultimate results of the RFP indicate that it could or should.
Okay, and you're comfortable, I take it then, that the scoring system accounts for all of that?
We are. Our professional judgment on this, and, you know, the involvement in supporting the staff and assembly of this indicate that this is a high quality document that will give the information and necessary evaluation process.
Okay. So
Mr. Chairman, just quickly, I think the other thing to keep in mind is we have built in a significant amount of slack to make sure that any transition, should it happen, be accommodated. You can see the intended date for contract award is targeted at September 1. Our contract does not expire until March 31 of 2022. So we are trying to give ourselves as much time as possible to accommodate any sort of transition should it be necessary.
Good. Well, thank you. So the other question, I guess, for Lindsay and Jonathan is the market for this. Are we going to get multiple responses? And we're holding you to this, so you might, you know, be.
Yeah, it's a competitive marketplace. It has consolidated significantly, though, over time. I would say that for a large asset owner of the size and complexity of the board and the portfolios that are maintained here, we do expect that there is a opportunity for robust competition of several more than your incumbent. I would say that generally speaking, within the U.S. asset owner space, we observe there to be 4 primary providers at this point: State Street, your incumbent, BNY Mellon, JP Morgan, and Northern Trust.
Good. Good. And last but not least, Jonathan, don't make your, we seem to see you once every 5 to 7 years, so don't be a stranger,
Not at all.
Anything else?
If I might, Mr. Chair, I just have a question about the process of state procurement's involvement throughout the process.
So we have had to go back and explain a number of things a number of times. There were objections to RVK being involved in the process. We overcame those. There was objections to spreading the work out over multiple staff. We overcame those. It is, state procurement, in my personal opinion, state procurement is not built to handle a $25 billion contract and solicitation. So this was very much outside their comfort zone, and it took a lot of work, particularly on Peg's part, to overcome that. But luckily, she's good enough, she's smart enough, and gosh darn it, people like her. So we were able to work through those. I won't say quickly, but we were able to work through them.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else? If not, is there a motion to approve the RFP for custodial bank services?
I'll move the RFP.
Okay. Is there a second? My Diana seconded. Is there any additional comments from anyone? Questions? Comments? Going once, going twice? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously among the board members who are present today. So, Lindsay, Jonathan, thank you for your assistance in this. I know this is a significant item that we've asked RVK to help us with, and as in the past, I take it your help has been greatly appreciated, and of course, Peggy and Dan shepherding us this far through the state process. So thank you all.
Thank you. We appreciate the opportunity to be of assistance, and certainly you have a very, very talented staff that we've had the fortune of working with as well.
And as I say, Jonathan, let's not have 5 years before we see you again, or 7 years before we see you again.
Okay.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Okay. Nothing further on that. So Dan, we turn it over to you for about a half an hour to a little training here on the meaning of our fiduciary duty.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Dan White again, Chief Legal Counsel with the board, WHYTE. You had the pleasure of Carl spelling my name several times. In fact, I appeared once before the Ninth Circuit Court and spelled my name as I introduced myself and said, may it please the court. And one of the justices stopped me and said, I'll bet you've had to do that your whole life. As Carl, I'm sure, has had to do with his name and
I've had
several
to do
others.
it a time or two, and one time I was so nervous I forgot how to spell my name. I always tell that to people who are going to be witnesses for me. I tell them, we're going to do this, and you're going to, and this is going to be a little weird, and but you can do this. And now, having told you that, let me tell you about the time I forgot how to spell my own name.
Yeah, exactly. All right, thank you. I am here to essentially talk about 3 things. One is confidentiality and how that applies to the board and to state agencies in general. I'm also here to talk about the ethics policy that you all signed just a recap of that again and where that comes from. And then finally, the fiduciary duty that the board owes. And you might wonder why we're having this conversation. A lot of what protects this board and protects the assets that this board oversees has to do with the duties that are owed by the board. And so I'm in my discussions of confidentiality, of board ethics, of fiduciary duty, it's all part of that protection of those assets. It's part of the protection that is afforded to the board so long as you follow all of those responsibilities. And my recommendation to Dan Villa, since we have several Dans, to Dan Villa was that we have this discussion and be given the opportunity to give you this little lecture that I'm going to do for the next few minutes so that you understand what your responsibilities are. And I'm sure that all of you do already, but I wanted to cover some specifics. And so that if the question of your responsibilities or actions that you've taken or actions that the staff has taken or recommended to you come into question, we have this protection that we have as part of our checklist so that the board is protected, so that anybody who questions what it is that you do and what we do has some meat to back it up. So with that, I'll bring up the first of 3 documents that we're going to talk about today. So the first one that you're looking at, and these are all part of the packet that you would have received for the last board meeting, and I won't go, of course, won't go word for word. I think the most important provision that you want to look at, or the Montana Constitution in 1972, when the
Dan,
delegates.
it says you're sharing your screen, but we're not getting anything.
Interesting.
Other than, at least I'm not.
You're not, okay.
No, I have a little black space that says Dan has started screen
Has started sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got the same thing.
Okay.
So, Lindsay.
Lindsay. I'll stop sharing and see if Lindsay can bring up, she's got the documents too. Was everybody able to see the rules when I brought them up?
Yeah, shared fine.
Okay. Yep, generally user error, but well, let's see if Lindsay can get it done.
Lindsay.
Beautiful.
There we go.
Dan, she needs a raise. Anyway, so this, what you see before you is a product of what the 1972 Constitutional Convention brought forward. And it's a really unique constitution. I love to talk about it at length, but 2 of the provisions that the delegates to the Constitution thought were important were the public's right to know and the individual's right to privacy. And these can be competing interests. You'll see there that no person shall be deprived of the right to examine documents. So we are in a forum in which all that we do, all that you do as a board is public. Obviously, this is being recorded today. It will be kept for posterity. If there's ever any question about what the board does, somebody can look it up on the state system. And any documents that come before the board are public. That is only overcome by the individual's right to privacy. Individual right to privacy is essential to the well-being of a free society and shall not be infringed without a compelling state interest. We don't often end up in a situation where an individual's right to privacy comes into play. There are some circumstances. So if we are dealing with an organization or a person that needs to provide to us bank information or banking information, Social Security numbers, FEINs, those kinds of things, that is something that we have a requirement to keep confidential. And you'll see under 2-2-104, the Montana legislature followed up the provisions in the Constitution to say that we have duties as state agencies, state employees, or public officers as you are, to keep private information confidential. Additionally, there was discussion in the last board meeting with Ethan about what he and his crew go through with respect to bringing in new parties to help us with our investments. And they go through a long process of discussion and review of files and documents with those companies before we ever decide that we're going to bring them into the fold. Very often we see situations where they have trade secrets or inventions or data, business methods, et cetera, that they want to keep confidential. We have a policy that says, okay, third party, we're going to keep that information confidential. We are not going to agree that it is necessarily going to be kept confidential if somebody challenges that in the state of Montana, especially with our constitutional provisions. However, we'll keep it confidential. We'll sign with you a non-disclosure agreement. But if a third party comes in, and one of your competitors, for instance, and says, hey, we know that you have this information and we want to see it of part of business company A, we will say, we can't give you that information at this point, but we will inform company A that there has been a request for their information. We'll give company A an opportunity to bring an action in a Montana court or another court trying to protect that information. And if the court tells us to hand it over, we'll hand it over. If the court tells us that it is in fact confidential, we'll then continue to hold on to it. So we have some measures in place that will protect that information, but not put us in a bind to protect someone else's information and somehow make the argument that we agree that their information should be confidential. So those are two situations, the individual versus a company, where we would protect it. And the last thing that I would say about that particular part of my discussion is that if somebody comes to any of you as board members and says, hey, we'd like to see such and such documents, that you can always ask Dan or ask me specifically whether the documents that are being requested should be disclosed. It's always better to take those cautions and say, hey, I'm going to make a few calls before I give that information over, than to hand it over and try and claw it back or get sued by someone else because we gave their confidential information up. With that, if anybody has any questions, I can answer those at this point. Okay, good, moving on. And I should say, some of you have heard this discussion. I had this conversation with Mark and Jeff Meredith as part of their orientation. Carl and Bruce were both there, as well as several staff members. So I apologize for those that are going to hear some repeat information, but I think it's important that Jack and Jeff Greenfield and Diane, who are here, should hear it. And then maybe I'll get together with Maggie and Terry and give them the hour-long version because they missed this meeting today. So I appreciate the patience of those who have heard it. And if anybody has any questions along the way, please let me know. So the second document that I'd like to offer today is, and let's see if this one works. Are you seeing? Nope, that's the wrong one.
We got it.
Okay, what are you seeing? Confidentiality provisions again?
Well, don't see the title to it. But we see the purpose, state of Montana
Yes,
employees.
that's the one. Perfect. Okay. This is from the MOMS manual. Sorry, I should back up. That for those of you who may not know, the Montana Operations Manual is the official policy of the state of Montana that has everything from vacation and travel policies to what you're seeing here which is the state ethics policy. It's driven by the state statutes that are mentioned in the code of ethics that you sign, and has several purposes. That it really is there to protect the public. You'll see under purpose, it talks about public trust and public duty. We all, whether we're employees or staff or public officials, have a duty to the public to act ethically. Generally speaking, we have a duty to be educated with respect to what those standards are. As you know, you've all signed the policy and had an opportunity to read it. One of the major drivers of this particular policy is to prevent conflicts of interest. And I'll talk about that too in the fiduciary duty part of my discussion. But there are several areas that you can see that talk about what circumstances under which there might be a conflict of interest. I'll just read the first one in part and then touch on a couple of others. State employees may not engage in substantial financial transactions for the employee's private business purposes with a person whom the state employee inspects or supervises in the course of the employee's official duties. So how that could affect the board, of course, is that there are investments that are made on behalf of the state of Montana for whether it's for the equity or private assets or buildings or the pensions. And each of you as Montanans have a duty to make sure that you don't have a conflict of interest with respect to any of your personal transactions or businesses that you may be involved in, and the work that you do for the board. And one that is an easy target would be Jeff Meredith's business. If as a banker, if there was business that the Board of Investments wanted to do or engaged in with the bank with whom Jeff is associated, then he would have to review that with you and with Dan and with me with respect to whether there's any conflict of interest. And if there is, then he might have to recuse himself from those particular actions that the board takes with respect to that bank. If he finds that in the middle of the transaction, he realizes that there's a conflict, then he would have to be careful to try and pull himself away from that as best he could. So that's just one example of something that could happen. And then confidentiality of information is interwoven with this, and just to make sure that everything is kept confidential as part of our ethical obligation. The other one I think that is most important probably to this board is the obligation not to take any gifts. There is a state limit of anything over $50 in value, but it's in my conversations with Dan Villa, we have decided, and the board has decided, that it's better just to not take anything of value. Those items that are given to any of you or any staff members are to be reported. And then there are ways to make sure that those things either get passed on or given to a charity in the future. Now, if it's with respect to educational opportunities, then we are able to take advantage of those under some circumstances. So that's generally what I wanted to touch on with respect to the ethics. Does anybody have any questions with respect to that? Okay, good. And the final portion of my conversation, getting my documents out, is the fiduciary duty of the board. And where did that one go? Let's see. Apologies, I seem to have briefly misplaced it. Okay, there we go. All right. Do you all see
the PowerPoint?
Awesome. Okay. I'll try and keep this as brief as I can, of course, but it'll take me a few minutes to get through it. So any organization like this board, whether private or public, owes a fiduciary duty. I think you're probably all familiar with the basic terminology that are involved: the plan sponsor, the Constitution, or the legislature. And in this case, it's, again, the Montana Constitution is unique in that under Article 8, Section 13, the delegates created the Unified Investment Program, where public funds, public retirement systems, and state compensation insurance fund assets are placed for the protection of the state. The Board of Investments was then created to oversee that. And so the plan sponsor is the Constitution. The legislature also makes trusts funds like the Coal Trust. And so they are the ones who create those. And then the trustees at the bottom of that page are you, who oversee those assets. I'll skip that page. Fiduciary responsibility. The most famous quote came from Justice Cardozo when he was still in the New York court system and before he became a U.S. Supreme Court justice. And it is often repeated in any cases that talk about a fiduciary duty. It is the highest duty of trust and confidence that a person may owe to another. In his quote, he says, not honesty alone, but the punctilio of an honor, the most sensitive, is then the standard of behavior. As to this, there has developed a tradition that is unbending and inveterate. Uncompromising rigidity has been the attitude of courts of equity when petitioned to undermine the rule of undivided loyalty. So that gives you a sense of how important the courts have felt it is. And then the Ninth Circuit also commented that these duties are the highest known to the law. The Ninth Circuit Court being the one that in which the state of Montana is located. The legislature, as I mentioned, is the one who creates the plan. They have their functions in creating the trust and making options available as to what should happen with that trust. And then your duties come down to the examples of fiduciary functions, managing the plan, controlling assets, and administering benefits. The Board of Investment.
One thing we're seeing on our screen is the title of your PowerPoint. We're not.
Interesting, because I'm going through it and you're not seeing that.
Right.
Okay, Lindsay, any thoughts?
So we're on page 5, I think.
I'm on page 5.
Right.
I do not know why I'd be doing that, but if you want me to take over the screen,
Yeah.
I'm happy to do so.
Yes, please. I think it'll be better if you do. Apologies. I don't know why it's not filtering through. And Lindsay and I even did a precursor. We practiced this morning so that I would not have this problem, but here we are. Thank you.
There we go.
Okay.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Yep, appreciate it, Lindsay. And then if I'll let you know as to what page I'm moving on to. So I was talking about examples of fiduciary functions about 2/3 of the way down the page. Managing the plan and controlling the plan assets are your obligation, and as delegated to the staff, our obligation. And then some states, the boards also administer the benefits, but in Montana, especially with respect to things like the pension benefits for public employees, that those are administered by other boards and not this one. We can move on to the next page. The key fiduciary standards, and I'll talk about each one of these specifically, but there's the exclusive rule benefit, your duty to act solely in the interests of the participants. Prudent expert standards, that's both statutory and industry-wide language that's used with respect to how you're supposed to act. Following the plan document is basically following the law, whether it's everything from the Constitution with respect to the unified program or the legislative directive with respect to specific trust funds. For instance, the coal trust, we can only touch the interest and the principal stays as is. Diversification, diversifying the assets is important, as you all know, with respect to making sure that we get the best return and don't put all of our eggs in one basket. And then to be careful not to do anything that is specifically prohibited. We talked generally a few minutes ago about your ethical obligations with respect to making sure that there's you don't end up with a conflict of interest that would include things like self-dealing or transactions that would benefit you or someone else that are not specifically for the participants. I'm ready to go to the next page. So the two most important duties that I know you're all aware of, but are important to repeat: the duty of loyalty, solely in the interest of and for the exclusive purposes of providing benefits to the participants and their beneficiaries while defraying reasonable expenses, and the duty of prudence. And this is, as I mentioned a minute ago, this is both in statute under 17-6-201 and also an industry-wide standard. And with the care, skill, prudence, and diligence under the circumstances then prevailing, that a prudent person acting in a like capacity and familiar with these matters would use. So we'll talk about each one of these in some detail. All right, next page. The duty of loyalty, it looks as if I'm repeating myself, and I think I am a bit here, but the duty of loyalty is really one of the two key ingredients, and that is that when you are on this board or any other board that you might be on, your fiduciary duty is solely to the plan, and it's solely to the interest of the members and the beneficiaries for whom we all work. You might be challenged in many ways by outside influences, and you and we as staff have to remember that there is no balancing test here, that your sole view is to ensure that these assets go on in perpetuity, that we as the staff are doing our job in making sure that there's a rate of return, and that the beneficiaries and the people who are the intended persons to benefit from this are who we work for. Now we can go to the next page. And then I list several outside influences that could occur. Participating employers might want to try and influence how you operate. Union members or other constituents might want to try and influence. The legislature may say, hey, we created this particular plan or trust, and so here's how we want you to operate. Now, they of course can say how, as on a general scale, how it should operate, but it is not the job of the legislature to tell the board how specifically it should be invested or how to diversify. And so we and you have to remember that that influence is one where you obviously need to have the conversation with the legislature, but also tell them that you are solely working for the plan and for the assets. And one in particular that I would mention, of course, is that the governor may have some plans for what he thinks the Board of Investments should do. And it is the governor that puts all of you on this board with the approval of the legislature. But even the governor only gets a limited say in what it is that the board then does once you as individuals are members of this group. So, and others that may be involved are, you can go to the next page, are county commissioners, county executives, taxpayers, and we just have to remember that as board members, you have a sole obligation to the plan, and that while it's important to listen to those outside influences, that you cannot be persuaded by them and cannot do anybody else's bidding, but only do what you think is best for the investments that the board oversees. Okay, I'm ready. Any questions? Because it sounds like I'm lecturing, and I guess in many ways that I am, but that really is the sole obligation, and it's important for me to tell you that, and it's important for you to tell others that, so that everybody knows the purpose of these investments, the purpose of the board. So I don't want to come over harshly, but that really is a key ingredient to this, and is important enough that we all need to keep it in mind, because then that is the next step into what is your duty of prudence. Okay, so I have an obligation to the investments. Now, once we get into the investments, which goes into your diversification, which goes into delegating things to the staff, what duty do I have to that, to taking care of those investments? And I've read to you already what the duty of prudence is, but the courts have spoken on it too. And this quote I thought was important. The test of prudence is one of conduct and not a test of the result of the performance of the investment. The focus of the inquiry is how the fiduciary acted in his selection of the investment and not whether his investment succeeded or failed. Okay, Lindsay, I'm ready to go. And that, by saying that, it means that you have to do your best for those investments. The staff has to do its best for those investments. It does not mean that we have to guarantee a return. It does not mean that there won't be days where there may be a loss. But what it means is that you take the best care and skill and diligence to make sure that the investments that we make are sound, and that under the best circumstances there will be a return. It doesn't mean that you have to be perfect. It just means that you've understood the facts as presented to you, you've investigated the options available, and that you seek the expert of advice, that both from the staff and from the organizations that we contract with, and that as long as you have done that and acted prudently in those investments, then you are protected as a board. The state of Montana is also protected in its investments. All right, Lindsay, thanks. And just to touch base on again what I said a minute ago, I think the last piece is important. You are not expected to be perfect. I don't want to put the fear of God in anyone, but as long as you've acted prudently, then the board is safe and the board is doing its job. All right, I'm ready to go to the next page. This just is, if you remember the graph that had the 5 boxes, this is the one that says as long as you follow the law and the plan documents, then you're doing your job. And we've talked about the law here. We've talked about executive director's role and the staff's role, and then my role too. And I'm available always if there's any question about, hey, this statute says this, it says we're supposed to do such and such with the trust. What do you think that means with respect to the board? And as long as you follow that, then you're protected. Okay, I'm ready. Because then that leads into fiduciary liability. If under some circumstances you were ever accused or questioned with respect to whether you were following your fiduciary duty, there are protections for the board. And specifically section 2-9-305 protects all public officers and employees from civil action if they're acting within the course and scope of their employment. And that of course includes you, and it includes your staff, we who work for you. There are no claims for exemplary or punitive damages, but if we're not careful and we're not acting within the course and scope of our employment, then we could be subject to civil lawsuit, loss of reputation, or even potentially criminal actions. Again, I use these as cautionary notes because there are substantial protections for the board as long as it does what it did today. I mean, you talked about the RFP that's going out. The board, along with RVK, took a lot of time to put that together. We talked to them because of their expertise. We've talked to internal staff because of expertise working with these custodial contracts. Offered that to you today. You asked lots of great questions and then ultimately voted on it. That is just the kind of action that is showing that you've followed your fiduciary duty. And one important point is just to, if there is ever a conflict of interest or a potential breach, you all have an obligation to make each other aware of it too, because there is a duty of co-fiduciaries to make sure that your partner, the person sitting next to you in a meeting, is also following the same duties that you follow. Okay, I'm ready. And then again, go through the prudent processes, protections, sound written policies, which we do, demonstrate the prudent process. We have open meetings, going back to what is public in the state of Montana. As long as your meetings are open and transparent, then you've continued to do your job for the citizens of Montana. And to finally, to avoid conflicts of interest. Thanks, Lindsay. Next one. I won't go through these in detail, but here is, I think, an important checklist of common and best practices. Established documentation, thorough decision-making, ongoing oversight. A couple of things that we haven't talked about is to make sure that someone else gets to see what it is we do. If you go to page 20, Lindsay, you know, we've adopted a code of conduct. There is, we've got ethical standards and everybody signs the agreement. And then to have internal control framework, audit committee through the legislative auditor and internal audit functions. And as you know, those are performed on a regular basis and reviewed by you also. And then the last piece that I just will touch on is what happens when politics get involved. And in a situation like this where the legislature is in place, there's always questions about whether there's going to be enough in the budget. There's this pot of money that's sitting out there that the Board of Investment oversees. What is your duty if you do get political pressure? And there are 5 areas that I've touched on here on page 22. You're the neutral administrator. You're taking care of the funds as you're supposed to. And Dan, in his role, makes sure that the legislators know what our obligations are, what our work is, and to hopefully assuage them from trying to get involved in the day-to-day operations. You act as an advisor and an educator in that same capacity. You protect the funds, the assets that we have under the unified program. With the help of the staff, you're an innovator in seeing what new ways we can invest to make sure that there's a rate of return, and when necessary to act as an advocate or activist. I think this is rare, but occasionally there might be a circumstance where Dan has to get involved as a lobbyist or maybe even a board member at such time as to protect the funds that you oversee. And then on the last couple of pages, I think I actually 23 and 24 got out of place, so apologies for that. But generally speaking, on page 24, that's just a couple of extremes where if in difficult political times, the board is in the under the microscope from the public or from the legislature or from the governor, or where people question the work that you're doing because not enough money is made, whatever that might mean. But as long as you continue to do the work that you're doing, then those protections are there for you and it's easy to defend those. And then on pages 23 and 25, just a couple of summaries as to how best to operate as a board. So that is the discussion on fiduciary duty. Hopefully that's helpful to the board members as you move forward into this next couple of years. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Questions for Dan?
Carl, this is Jack. I have a question. Dan, since you're new and you've looked at the organization through these lenses, is there anything that rises to concern that we should double check our procedures or policies or anything we're doing? Is there any areas of, I think we're doing everything okay, but any of concern that we should look at?
Jack, that's a great question. I really appreciate that one. Yes, and I think in many respects, the board is already doing that. It's going through its custodial contract and sending out an RFP today. That is an important thing. There's a lot of money that flows through there and a lot of obligations of the custodial bank. So you are taking the action necessary to do that. My speaking to you today and to the new board members in their orientation with respect to what the fiduciary duties are, I think that's really important because you haven't, I know you've had attorneys, outside counsel in the past, maybe have these conversations with you, but now that I'm embedded in the organization, have had an opportunity to see how it operates, I think I can lend a new perspective to the board with respect to answering those types of questions. One thing that I've talked with Dan about is revisiting the ethics policy for legislative members, and where they have said, we don't think we need to sign that ethics policy as ex officio members of this board. That's one thing that we're at least going to address with them to say, you know, here are the obligations we think you have, and then move on from there. And if they don't sign, they don't sign, but it's something that after several years of not discussing with them directly, I think is important to discuss with them directly so that they understand that also. And there was one other, and without tooting my own horn, I think it's important that the board hired a chief legal counsel for this operation, because there is a lot that goes on. And I have said before, and I'll say again, I have a lot to learn with respect to the investment side. And I'd like to learn more of that so that I know that my advice that I'm giving when it comes to the legal aspects of that investment advice is sound. But I can't tell you how many times Dan or Peggy or others will just walk around the corner and come to me and say, hey, what do you think about this? And that ability to have that conversation in real time, I think, is invaluable. And so hopefully I'll be, the advice I give will be sound and responsive. But Jack, I think those are all really important points that this board is taking action on. I appreciate that question, and we'll continue to look for new ideas.
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Sure.
Also to Mr. White. I know that you've had an opportunity to review a lot of things about the board operations. One of the things that I'm most interested in, I think, is our board education plan. Have you looked at the board's plan as it exists and made any determination whether the frequency of our trainings or the topics of our training are expansive enough to cover what you think should be covered based on your legal view of it?
Mr. Chair, Director Fladmo, I have not looked at that. I will discuss with Dan that particular policy and would be happy to look into it and report back to the board at the next meeting.
Thank you.
Anything else? You know, I think of all the board members, I've probably disqualified myself more than others from particular decisions having to do with clients, mainly having to do with clients, but banking clients for whom I've done some minor work. And I'm guided by the requirements of the licensure for lawyers, which is avoid even the appearance of an impropriety.
Right.
And I find it very easy to do. And we've got a good board and we get good attendance. So it's not like my vote is needed because we don't have a quorum or something like that. And I'm not telling other people what to do or how to do it, but I just want to tell you that as the person who's done it the most, I think it's very easy to do.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think Terry has disqualified herself a number of times, particularly over the parking meters in Helena. She refused to vote on those.
Over the parking meters in Helena. So upset about the parking meters in Helena. She refused to vote on the loan to the city of Helena for the parking meters. Is that right?
No, she just yelled at us afterwards.
I think that was more of an emotional response. Mark, you're in charge of dealing with that. Anything else from anybody? All right, so we're next up. Oh, Mark, I'm sorry.
Just maybe real quickly, Dan, can you give us an update on legislative process and anything new there and the ARPA loan or money?
So relative to the ARP money, the CARES Act 3.0, I've gotten pinged a couple of times from legislators. Basically what I've told them in essence is we will do what we're asked, but we're not going to join in the food fight of presenting the best ideas in the universe. You can't walk through the Capitol right now without getting a white paper on how this $650,000 is the best idea ever. Have gotten a number of calls from business owners who'd like to renew the working capital and loan deferment programs. I sent them to the respective chairs of the Finance and Appropriations Committees, as well as recommended they call the governor's office, particularly the budget office. We're still waiting to get the cash. John and the fixed income team are anxiously awaiting some large deposit and wire. And then it looks like, once that comes in, John and his team will decide how to place it, whether or not it's goes in the treasurer's fund in the overnight account again, or STIP. It will be John's call the day it comes in. But I think from a tectonic perspective, we're not going to ask for any money. We're not going to give any good ideas. But if they decide the programs that we previously ran need to be renewed, we will be happy to help however we can. Legislation wise, was one bill by Representative Hamilton. I know some of you are familiar with regarding hiring an additional actuary in addition to RVK and their work they do for us and the work that the pension systems do. That bill was defeated on third reading. So I think from what new bills lay out there, there's not a lot we've got our eyes on right now that have direct implications on the board. It's really just the additional vacancy savings and whether or not we get any ARP money that sort of has my radar going.
So Dan, are we at 5% vacancy savings now?
No, the drafter of the amendment did not draft the amendment in a way which includes us. So we are at 4.
Thank you.
If I remember this right, and if I'm not remembering right, tell me, right after we got the CARES Act money, we had to have a board meeting to do something special with it to keep it out of the general STIP account. Yes, that we amended the investment policy statement to allow for additional cash vehicles within the treasurer's cash account. Okay, that's an amendment that sticks with us, so we're not going to have a situation like that. No, well, as of now, no, but if something changes where we need to loop you up, I will get back to you. I think we'll err, as we have for the last year, on the side of caution that more special board meetings, even if they're 15-20 minutes, are better than sort of operating in the dark. So we'll err on the side of more meetings as opposed to fewer if there is a change needed. Right, and for Jeff Meredith and Mark Berry, that's what we decided with the COVID thing, to just, when in doubt, have a quick board meeting.
That works.
Until people screamed uncle, and I don't remember anybody screaming uncle. Just about parking meters, nothing about the parking meters. Extended discussion of the benchmark for private equity. And foreign exchange, yeah. Okay, anything else to come before the board at this special meeting? So when are we up next there, Dan? April 20th, mailing day is 2 weeks from last Wednesday. We're going to bump mailing day back a little bit to give you a bit more time to review the documents. This will be a big one. We've got international equity deep dive that John and his team have been working on. So this will be a big one. We do need the
travel forms back from board members, not necessarily for just coming to Helena, but should you go to conferences, for your RVK trip to Portland, if we ever reopen, those sorts of things with the travel agency, we do need that form back.
Could Lindsay at least send me that again, please?
Yep.
And I think that arrived on a day I was having some downloading issues.
Okay,
So
we'll ship it out
that's what
again.
happened to that. Anything else?
Well, Carl, that's a good story on your part anyway, whether you had downloading issues or it was the internet or maybe operator error, but whatever.
I said I was having downloading issues. I didn't say what caused.
Yeah, I heard you.
And that's, I'm copywriting that, Jeff, so you come up with a different excuse for,
Okay.
well, once again, it was nice to at least see you all. And one of these days, we'll get a chance to meet in person and meet the mysterious Jeff Meredith in person even. So anyway, with that, unless anybody else has anything else, we're adjourned. Thank you all. See you.
Thank you. Thanks. See you guys.